All right, if you guys want to turn to Daniel chapter 7, we're going to pick up where we left off. And so just to kind of get us back on the same page, Daniel's about 83 years old. Now, we will have a jump back in time as we start Daniel chapter 7, but I'll get to that in a minute. Daniel's 83 years old where we left off in Daniel chapter 6. And Babylon has fallen, Persia has taken over, and sort of the vision that we get in chapter 2 with Nebuchadnezzar is starting to happen. You know, the Babylonian kingdom falls, the Persians come in and take over, Greece is going to come next, then Rome. And so what's going to happen tonight, again, is we're going to have kind of a jump back in time. And so that's kind of what makes Daniel difficult, is sometimes we're talking about now, and sometimes we're talking about now in the future, and sometimes we're talking about now in the past. And so it's kind of difficult to put all that together. But again, we're going to see God revealing himself. Did we lose? There we go. I thought I kind of lost it there for a second. We see God revealing himself to Daniel and to a foreign nation so he can draw these people to himself, and also to speak into the tragedy and pain that Daniel and his people are experiencing. So let's look in Daniel chapter 7. We're going to read, then we're going to come through and explain. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. We love questions, and so I want you to do that. So Daniel 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one resembling a bear. It was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. After this, I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong. It had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Now, one of the things that's difficult when we read this sounds like absolute nonsense, doesn't it? This sounds like Daniel's having an LSD dream. Like, Daniel, what'd you dream last night? Well, I dreamed of this animal that had horns and one had eyes and a mouth. And they're like, dude, what did you eat before you went to bed? We'll come back to that in a minute. Verse 9, I kept looking until thrones were set up. And the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow. The hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were opened. I kept looking because the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. Then all peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away. His kingdom is one which will never be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. And I would say, no duh, like I would probably have the same problem too. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. Then I desired to know the exact meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head and the other horn which came up and before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts and which was larger in appearance than its associates. I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will rise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High, wear down the saints of the highest one. He will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half time. But the court will sit for judgment, his dominion will be taken away, annihilated and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So, here we go. We're going to have a tale of 2 visions. So tonight is basically a recap or kind of a reimagining of the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It's scary to him. He wakes up in the middle of the night. He calls in all his magicians and sorcerers and conjurers and says, I want you to tell me what the dream is, and I want you to tell me what the interpretation is. And they're like, nobody can do that. I can't tell you what dream that you had last night. And so they do all the things that they do. And finally, he calls Daniel in, and Daniel tells him what the dream was and tells him the interpretation. And it was this statue, right? It was a statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay. And it was about the kingdoms that were going to come after Babylon. Well, here we go. We have the same vision. Daniel has the same vision, but in a different way. And like I told you, we are jumping backwards in time. This vision happens 9 years after Nebuchadnezzar dies. So you have the guy Belshazzar. We go back to chapter 5 and we hear about Belshazzar the first time, and he has the vision, or actually he's having a big party, and the hand of God comes and writes on the wall and tells them that they're everything's going to be taken away from them. And that night Babylon comes, or Persia comes in and takes Babylon, right? So this is 9 years before that. So we've jumped back in time. Daniel is working, and he's probably in his late 70s at this point. He's working with Belshazzar, and this is going on, and Daniel has this vision. Now, this is the first time in the book of Daniel that Daniel has a vision. Now, he's going to have more as we go along, but this is the first time that he's had one, because his job up until this point has been to interpret everybody else's vision. So, basically, what you're going to see tonight is kind of a different perspective that God gives to Daniel. Now, I'm imagining as he's having this dream, he's like, wow, I've heard this before, but it looks completely different, because remember, it was a statue before, and now what is he seeing? Beasts, right? And so what we're seeing is, I think the difference that you're going to see in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, God was speaking to Nebuchadnezzar in a way that Nebuchadnezzar would understand. And so God isn't going to show him the things that he shows Daniel, because he wouldn't have understood that. What Daniel sees, and what we're going to see in this vision tonight, is what God is going to do to these kingdoms, and how these kingdoms are going to be like wild animals. They're going to come and they're going to take over everything. They're going to destroy. They're going to do all these kind of things. But ultimately, the same outcome for this vision is the outcome of chapter 2, that there is a kingdom that's coming, an eternal, everlasting kingdom that is headed by the Son of Man, the Ancient of Days, and it's a kingdom that can never be conquered. It's a kingdom that goes all over the world. It's the kingdom who wins. And so as we look at that, you're going to hear some familiar things, and you're going to be like, yeah, we heard that before. I remember that. Remember that, but also remember that this is very different. This is something that God gives to Daniel, and Daniel writes it down and gives it to us later. We don't know, and I don't think he does. I don't think he shares this with Belshazzar. I don't think he goes to the guy and say, hey, I had a dream last night, and let me tell you what God told me. And he doesn't share it. He keeps it to himself. We hear that at the end of this. So the vision he gets is 4 winds, 4 beasts, and a great sea. Now, when we're looking at visions and we're dealing with these things in the Bible, it's a little difficult sometimes, because sometimes They are very specific. We're going to be able to look at this and kind of very specifically work through and say, this is this, and this is this, and this is this, because they tell us. Sometimes we get things in the Bible and there's a vision or there's a prophecy or there's something, and it's not as easily, transferred to say this is what it is, and we have to let God tell us. And so what happens, he's using things that are very common. We see the four beasts. Now, he's using four beasts to talk about four kings and four kingdoms. And so what happens is a lot of times we get caught up in the imagery and we're trying to imagine what these animals look like. So let me give you a little secret. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. He's trying to communicate some things about these kings and kingdoms that he's using through kind of animal-like features and things, but he doesn't want you to get caught up in like, okay, we need to sit down and we need to draw a lion with wings that are broken. So we can you don't need to understand that. And so sometimes we get caught up in the imagery, and that's really difficult. Like if you read Revelation, it's not hard to get caught up in the imagery in there, right? It's a lot. So he's trying to explain some things to us, actually to Daniel, so Daniel can explain it to the people, and we can get it too. God's trying to explain some things about these kingdoms, and inherently, one of the things that's common to all these kingdoms is that they're wild. They're like wild animals. They're not going to be tamed. They don't want to have a master, and definitely they want to cast off the fact that God is in control, right? So we have four winds, we have four beasts, and we have a great sea. So the first thing that we see, the great sea. Again, we have this imagery of this massive rolling sea, and we're trying to figure out what sea is it? Is it the Mediterranean? Is it this? No, it's the sea of humanity. These kings and these kingdoms are coming up out of the sea of humanity. And basically what he's kind of saying is that Daniel was seeing kind of what we see. Daniel was looking around and he lived in an immoral kingdom that had been led by immoral kings that did not honor God, that did not listen to God, that did not follow God. And spoiler alert, guess what was happening in all the other kingdoms around the world? Same thing. They had immoral kings and they were immoral people. They were doing immoral things. And so he kind of pulls this imagery from, this idea that there's this chaos out there. And the chaos isn't the sea. The chaos is humanity. We have rejected God. We've thrown God off, and we're trying to govern ourselves and take control over the world, because that's what all these kingdoms are going to do. They're going to try to take over the known world at the time. And so we're trying to create all this chaos. And so here's what he's saying. You need to recognize that these four beasts are coming out of the chaos of humanity. This is humanity's best attempt. This is humanity's greatest attempt to exert control over the earth. Now, here's what I like. Verse 2. I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the sea, and four beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. Now, we have the coming out of the sea, but here's the thing. What stirs up this for this to happen? It's the four winds. Now, again, people spend a lot of time and they spill a lot of ink and commentaries talking about wind and all this kind of stuff. The reality is, what's happening here is God is telling Daniel, I'm the one that is causing this to happen. I'm the four winds. I'm coming in all directions and I'm stirring this up. I'm in control of all this. And so the first thing that we need to see is, yes, these kingdoms are going to be mighty. They're going to be scary. They're going to be powerful. But behind all of that, there is a God who's in control of every bit of it. And everything that's going to happen, and we'll touch on this in a minute, everything's going to happen is actually leading toward God's plan of salvation to bring Jesus. So we have God's sovereignty seen in the four winds. He's the one that's in control. And he's come in to do this. And so here we have the great sea and all of this kind of stuff. And we have the four beasts. And he tells us what they are. And so we're going to kind of run through this really quickly, because I really want to focus on the meaning of the dream more than this kind of stuff, because the meaning is the most important. So he says, here's the beast number one, a lion. And the lion is Babylon. The lion is the gold head of the statue. If you remember the statue, it had a gold head. And remember, Nebuchadnezzar really liked that, and he liked it so much, what did he do? Built a gold statue of himself, That was like 91 feet tall, right? It was like you could see it from everywhere. So here we have this lion, the golden head of the statue. But here's the thing. What Daniel sees from God and what Nebuchadnezzar saw, he saw gold. He saw sparkly. He saw wonderful. What does Daniel see? Daniel sees a lion who has wings, but the wings have been clipped. So now you would have an animal who's strong and fast, but the fast part has been taken away. And not only that, it doesn't walk on, 4 legs anymore. It's now standing up like a human walking on 2 legs. Now think about this. If a lion is walking on 2 legs, is he fast anymore? No. It's kind of a really kind of weird and strange thing, right? So here's what he's trying to say. Here's the lion who was strong, who was speedy, who was this powerful force. That's all gone. That lion is unable to fight. That lion is gone. The wings have been clipped. He's walking on 2 feet. He's a target, right? He's a target now. He once was the king of the jungle. Not anymore. Well, who do we have to worry about? Well, we have to worry about the bear. So next we have the bear with nasty teeth and claws and all these kind of things. And the bear is on its hind legs, but it's in a forward position. And what it means is that it's moving forward in power. And so the bear is Persia. It's the next kingdom who's coming. They're going to take over Babylon. They're the chest of silver. It's massive. The way he describes this bear is this massive bear, which is exactly what the Persian Empire was. The Persian Empire was known for a couple of things. When they would come to fight you, they would come with lots of people. What we find out is that there are times when the Persian Empire would show up to a battle with 2.5 million people. I want you to think about that for just a second. You roll out to fight against this empire, and they roll up, and basically what they would say is the people would be like the sands on the seashore. You just people after people after people after people after people, right? Now, on top of that, not only did they bring a ton of people, Persia was known for when they would conquer somebody, they would take all of the cool stuff that they have. And so they would show up with elephants and tigers and magicians and all this kind of stuff. Like their army was scary. And so here's what you have. You have this massive bear that has this massive army, and they devoured a ton of kingdoms super quick. Remember back in chapter 5, they came into Babylon. How long did it take them to overthrow Babylon? Do you remember?
1 night.
1 night. Did they fire a shot? Did they kill anybody? Well, they killed the king at the time, Belshazzar, but like they rolled in, done. In fact, the funny thing is it talks about the 3 ribs in the bear's mouth. Well, the Persian Empire was known for basically defeating 3 big kingdoms during their time. The first was the Lydian kingdom, Babylonians, and the Egyptians. And so this massive bear rolls up, takes out the lion, takes out the Egyptians, takes out this other kingdom. Now, we have the leopard. And so you have this massive bear, and then you come to this very swift leopard. The leopard is Greece. These are the torso of bronze from the statue back in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, Greece is an interesting study. They basically were kind of growing up while Persia and Babylon were coming to power, and Greece was kind of doing its own thing. And it really wasn't until Alexander the Great that Greece became a world power. And I want you to think about this. Alexander the Great was in his early 30s when he became general of Greece, kind of ruler of Greece. And do you know that in 12 years, he conquered the known world?
Wow.
12 years.
Yep.
He took 35,000 men, trained them, honed their skills, and they went out and destroyed the massive bear. Like, knocked the 2.5 million people down. They climbed mountains. I mean, we have the whole thing where they went and fought Hannibal on the mountains and all this kind of stuff. Like, it's amazing what this guy did in 12 years. Rules the known world. Now, what he talks about is the leopard has 4 heads. And what happened, and this is amazing because this is literally what happened. And so you got to understand, Daniel's writing this several hundred years before this happens. Greece shoots up. Alexander makes them a world power. Alexander is murdered early in his life. And then the 4 generals that had been under Alexander take over. So you have the leopard, Alexander, who has 4 heads, 4 generals. The leopard dies, but the 4 heads still live, and so you have the 4 generals. That's exactly what happened in history. Now, we come to the final beast, and this is the one that Daniel got really, really scared of. He calls it the dreadful and terrifying beast. We don't even know what it is. Like, he doesn't even try to describe that it looks like this or it's like that or it has eyes and ears. He says that it has claws and it has teeth and it has some stuff, but he just basically says it is dreadful and terrifying. And it's Rome. So we have Babylon, we have Persia, we have Greece, we have Rome. Now, if you go back and look at history, how did it go? Well, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. That's how it happened. So he tells us about this dreadful and terrifying beast, and it's Rome. And Rome are the legs of iron and the feet of clay on the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. But do you see the difference of what Daniel sees? He doesn't see legs and toes. He sees this dreadful, horrible, terrible beast. Why? Because they crushed, trampled, and devoured everything and everyone in their wake. And that's what they do. I mean, if you read the history of Rome, they come in, they sweep in like a scourge, and they just take over everybody, devour everything, change everything. Now, that beast also has 10 horns. And again, this is something that we see played out that hundreds of years before this happens, but played out in history. As the Roman Empire grows, you have 10 kings that show up in Rome that try to exert power and influence at different times. They're vying for the heart of Rome. And then you have one king that's going to come up, and he's going to basically take over. He's what's called the little horn. He's going to come in, conquer 3 kings. He's going to take over everything, and he's going to be worse than them all. And here's the deal. That's saying a lot. There was no Roman king that was good. I mean, they were immoral. They were horrible to people. They, just did horrible and terrible things. And for you to say, hey, there's going to be one that comes out of this group that's worse than them all, that's saying a lot. So, all these kingdoms receive the same fate. They all rise. They take control. They have power. They have influence. And then they're overthrown. They rise, take control, they have power and influence, and they're done. Now, back to the 4 winds idea that I was talking to you about. These kingdoms were part of God's plan. I want you to see how, yes, they did some horrible, terrible things, but that God did not condone that. God did not say, hey, I want you to go do horrible and terrible things. But God brought them and put them in place so some things could happen. The first one is with Persia. Persia comes in, destroys Babylon, and Cyrus takes over. And when Cyrus takes over, he brings Daniel into his court. Nehemiah is there, and he starts hearing about the people of Israel. He kind of has an affinity for Daniel and Nehemiah. He sees them as valued and trustworthy people. In fact, to the point where he makes Nehemiah the cupbearer to the king. And if you remember, cupbearers, that was a pretty tough job. You were kind of the inner circle of the king. They listened to your advice because you would taste their food. You were the fall guy. If somebody's trying to kill the king, they get you first, right? Cyrus, God moved on Cyrus's heart. He loved Nehemiah to the point where Cyrus wrote a decree to send the Jewish people home. Now remember, Persia rules all the known world at this time. And he sends a decree out and basically says, wherever Jews are found, if you are a slave, if you are in a foreign land, go home. Not only go home, but the people where you are, they have to let you go free, and they have to give you money and building material for you to take home so you can rebuild your home when you get there. Now tell me that's not a God thing, right? Persia, that's what happens. Greeks. Alexander develops a universal language and culture, not just him, but the Greek people developed a language called Greek. That people still speak, but they developed this language, and when they conquered everybody, one of the things they did made it really super simple. Here's what they did. Speak Greek or die. If you want to trade with us, you got to speak Greek. You want to have any, you don't want us to murder you, speak Greek. And so what they did is they created this universal language and culture. So why do you think God would allow that to happen? How does that move things forward? How do you think that helps the gospel to move forward? Well, the New Testament's in Greek. And if the New Testament's in Greek and nobody speaks Greek, how does that work? New Testament's in Greek, and what does everybody speak? It doesn't matter if you're in Africa, doesn't matter if you're in Asia, doesn't matter if you're in Turkey, doesn't matter if you're in England. Everywhere you go, you speak Greek. And this is an amazing thing. Historians don't see this, and it's just amazing how, God put these things together. So here's this place, and they've created a language and a culture that people kind of understand. So no matter where you go, everybody speaks the language. And then the Romans. The Romans were really good at a couple of things: building laws and building roads. Rome created this system of law to where, just because you may be traveling in another country, you shouldn't be robbed, you shouldn't be raped, you shouldn't be murdered, and there would be consequences if you were. And so they created this kind of national, and when I say national, it's the kingdom of Rome. But if you're under the Roman protection, if you're in the Roman kingdom, there are laws that protect your life. Oh, and guess what else we do? We build really great roads. So we connect places that you normally can't get to, and now you can get to them. Now think about this. How does that help spread the gospel? You can get there, yeah. And you also know that you're going to be protected on the way there. That they're not going to let roving bands of, mercenaries and murderers run around and kill you and take you into captivity and sell you into slavery. They're going to take care of that. And so here's the deal. God allowed all these kingdoms to come and do what they did, and look at how he does this. Persians send people home. The Greeks develop the language. The Romans build the laws and the roads. And here's the funny thing. And Satan does not see this. These are all Satan-backed kingdoms that follow his will and his rule. But Satan was laying the groundwork for his defeat. Oh, I'm gonna just, ravage the world, and they're going to destroy the world. And what's God going to do? Well, God's going to send a king and a kingdom that you can't conquer. And you're laying the groundwork for it to happen. All of these evil places laid the groundwork for when Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul, and Peter, and all those guys started going out. And it says, and they went to Tyre, and they went to Phoenicia, and they went here, and they went there. Guess how they got there? On Roman roads. And when they got there and they started speaking to people, guess how they spoke to them? In Greek. And so what they meant for evil, God meant for good. Now, did Daniel understand that when he saw that? No, he did not. We get the privilege of hindsight. We get to look back and see God laying all these things together and God giving us this historical picture of what's going to happen. And it's pretty bleak for a while. Like, I would be like Daniel. That terrible, horrible, no good, very bad monster, that scares me. Because he doesn't really understand how God is going to work through all of that. So, now, before we move on, I don't want to jump right into the Ancient of Days or the Son of Man. I want to go look at verse 11. He says, I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. What is he talking about? Well, this is one of those moments where we're talking about now and not now. He's basically saying all of these kingdoms have an appointed time that God has given them. They're going to rise up at the time he says. They're going to, have the power for the time that he says. They're going to fall when he says. All that's going to happen. And even this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad beast is going to be taken care of. But what he's also saying is we have to understand that there's going to be kingdoms like these four that are going to be here from now until Christ comes back. In fact, what we're going to find out, that fourth kingdom, Rome is kind of the catch-all for every kingdom that sets itself against God. And so basically what's happening in this vision is that Daniel is really kind of perplexed and alarmed and distressed by this little horn, because this little horn makes itself out to be a man, but a man is trying to be God, and this man is speaking profane things about God and blaspheming God and doing all this kind of stuff. And Daniel's kind of like, I don't get it. I don't understand it. Why is this happening? Now, we're going to answer the why is this happening. And it's the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. Now, here's the thing. If we got the beast vision and that's all we got and it stopped there, that would be a very bad dream, right? You'd wake up from that and be like, God, I don't want no part of that. This is awful and terrible. This is not the news that I wanted to hear. Why did you tell me all this stuff? But I'm thankful that we get that part of the vision and then immediately it switches to something else. We have a major scene change. Like, I want you to think about this in a play. Like you have the first act, the second act, the third act, and you know something's going to change because they drop the curtain, right? And the set changes and the curtain rises and you're like, oh, we're somewhere else. This is something totally different. Well, this is what happened. He has this vision of the sea of humanity and these beasts are coming up out of the sea and like, oh, this is danger and it's terrible and it's awful. And then curtain drops. Curtain rises. And listen what it says. I kept looking until thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames, and its wheels were a burning fire. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. The court sat, and the books were open. Like, you could almost just feel like the air gets sucked out of the room. Like it's one of those moments where you recognize, whew, this is a big deal. And so what I want you to see is he kind of talks about these beasts and yeah, they're, it's like a lion with wings. And I mean, like that to me is scary, right? I mean, a lion's bad enough. It's big, it's powerful, can chase you down, but it can fly too. Are you really kidding me? Like, come on, But then we get a picture of God. And I think what happens so much is we get overwhelmed by the imagery that we miss the stuff that's right in front of our face. It says, I kept looking, and then God shows up. And when God shows up, it's a really different story. God's appearance declares his holiness, his power, his authority, and worship. Like, you can almost imagine like a silence just kind of coming in that moment of like, wow. And you listen to the description. It says the Ancient of Days came and took his seat. I love that. I love that because, it declares his power and his authority. So you got these beasts coming up out of the mass of just, teeming people and chaos. And yet here's God who comes and takes his seat on the throne. Now, here's the thing you need to look at. Who did not sit on the throne? Satan, the lion, the bear, the leopard, this great, terrible, terrifying beast. They came up out of chaos. Where does God come from? God walks out of being in control, sets down in control, and is still in control over everything. Right? So he takes his seat on the throne of power. And when you see him, and this is the thing sometimes that's frustrating for us. I don't know if it is for you. We read this, it's like, I want to know what God looks like. And it says, the hair of his head is like wool, and his clothes are like white. Like, dude, come on. You can't get anything else? Well, here's the thing. We miss what he's trying to say. What he's saying is that God is so strikingly holy and so strikingly perfect. The only thing that I can see is the fact there is no sin in him. Like the thing that we're going to notice about God when we meet him is our breath is going to be taken away because you're going to see him in his glory. And it's like, wow. Wow. And so here's what he says. All I can explain to you is this dude is wearing a white as snow suit. Why? Because he's holy, because he's righteous, because he's pure, because he's perfect. His hair is like white as snow because he's the wisest of wise. And then it says that his throne was ablaze with flames. Again, we always want more detail. I don't know how much more detail you can get in this. The throne he sat on is ablaze with fire. And it says the wheels on it. Now, this is always difficult. Like, are we talking about real wheels? Like, is it a wheelchair? Like, what are we talking about here? In some way, God is in a chariot of fire. And so the throne is on fire. The wheels are on fire. In fact, there is fire shooting out of the front of it in like a lake of fire. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a crazy thing to think about, right? But here's the deal. It's judgment. God is holy. God is powerful. God has the authority to bring judgment, and he's going to do it, and he's going to do it in the right way at the right time, and it's going to bring judgment against those who are evil. And so we see God. He steps onto the scene and he just takes control of everything. And you can almost feel Daniel being like, and guess what? And guess what? And guess what? This is what God did. And then this makes total sense to me, and I hope it does to you. It says, and coming out from before him were thousands and thousands and myriads. They were attending to him. They were standing before him. Do you know what this is? Well, it's the saints, it's angels, it's created beings, and they're standing before God, worshiping him. Amen. And so the picture that Daniel wants to paint, or that God wants to paint for Daniel and for us, is Daniel's looking at a world situation that's completely out of control. It's going to be completely out of control for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. That's what he sees. And then he's sucked in to see behind the curtain. And he sees behind the curtain and he realizes it's not out of control at all. It's actually in God's control. And God has the power and the authority to take care of all of this. In fact, God is bigger than all the beasts that we're talking about. And here's what happens. The people who see him for who he is, what do? They worship him. They worship him. And then he closes this part of the vision with a very simple statement. The court sat and the books were opened. Now, again, we don't want to get too caught up in the imagery, but basically what's happening here is God's about to hold court. Not that he needs the opinion of all these people who are worshiping him. Not that he has an angelic court that he goes to and says, hey guys, I think that I want to do this. What do you think? What he's basically doing is about to lay out a case. And he's basically saying, this is what's going to happen. And I'm just going to declare right now what's going to happen. I'm going to bring judgment, and this is the way it's going to be. And all the people are going to say, amen. Make it so, God. Let it be true. Now, it says, the court sat and the books are open. I want to give you, in your handout, if you have it, I put in there Revelation 5. A lot of the imagery that we're talking about tonight is found in Revelation. John uses it to, God kind of declares this to John, and John uses it as part of his vision. But especially here in Revelation 5. Revelation 5 is an amazing chapter. What happens is in Revelation 5, we get to the place where, things are happening. He's written to the 7 churches, talking about them loving him and following him and serving him. There's been some difficulty where Satan's already kind of starting to persecute and attack the church. And then what happens in Revelation 5 is a flashback where it's like we go back to the kind of beginning of time and God's sitting on his throne, and we find out that, all these bad things are going to happen, and there's these scrolls, and it's the scroll of God's plan of redemption. And what it says is that there's nobody found on heaven or earth that can open the scrolls. And the elders and the angels and everybody began to weep because there's nobody that can do anything to save God's people because nobody's worthy. And then it says, and there was one who appeared, who looked as if they were a lamb who was slain, who came to the Ancient of Days and took the scroll and unwrapped the scroll, meaning that they had the power and authority to do God's plan. And so this is actually what's happening. The court sat, the documents are there, and it's like, who is going to do this? Well, jump down to verse 13. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominions an everlasting dominion which will not pass away. His kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. So here's what happens. The Son of Man appears. The Son of Man approaches God, the Ancient of Days. Now, there are a lot of people who say, well, that's not Jesus, that's a human, or that's not Jesus, that's this, that's not Jesus, that's that. Well, there's some things that happen in this that show us that this can't be a mere man.
That's right. Amen.
It can't. So the first thing that we see is that, behold, with the clouds of heaven, there's one like Son of Man. Well, how does this guy show up? He shows up riding a cloud. That's what he shows up doing. Now, if you read the Old Testament, the only one who shows up with a cloud is who? God. Do you remember when God was in the wilderness with the people of Israel? He showed up as a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So the Son of Man shows up in a cloud. He shows up in a cloud, and then he basically approaches the Ancient of Days. Now, it was a pretty nasty faux pas in the Old Testament times to walk up to a king. You couldn't just walk up to a king and say, "Hey, king, I need to talk to you," right? You had to be summoned. You had to be called. If you walked in and the king didn't want you there, he could just thumbs up, thumbs down, and you're dead. How much more do you think it would take for you to walk into God's throne room and God's presence and say, "I need to talk to you"? Do you check what happens here? Son of Man approaches. He came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. He wasn't called. He wasn't summoned. He came. He came on his own initiative, and he just walks right in. Now, what does that tell you? If he's approaching the King of Kings and the creator of the universe, there's something about this guy, right? There's something unique. There's something different. And then listen to what happens. He was given dominion and glory and power and a kingdom. He was given power over all the nations, and the nations are told to worship him and serve him. He's given a kingdom that will not pass away. Here's the thing. This Son of Man is given things that are only due to God. All throughout the Old Testament, all throughout the New Testament, we hear that the glory is to God alone. The power is to God alone. The glory is his. He doesn't share it with anybody else. And yet right here, all of the things that are particularly for God alone are given to the Son of Man. So here's what happens. Daniel gets this vision of God against the four beasts, and then he's given the vision of the Son of Man. That there's a kingdom that's coming, there's a king that's coming that is divine, that is holy, that is pure, that has the power and authority to come in and destroy all the work of these beasts. He has the power to save. And when he brings his kingdom in, it'll be forever. And it can't be taken away. So, that's where the vision ends. Now, it says, Daniel says, "I'm upset by this. I'm alarmed by this." So, the vision's now interpreted, and I appreciate this because, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in there, and there's a lot of things that Daniel saw in there. So, Daniel was distressed and alarmed. Now, I want you to think about this. I want you to answer this question. How would you handle seeing all of this? How would you handle it? Now, second question. How would you handle this after the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had had? You interpreted it. God told you what it meant. You interpreted it. You told him what was going to happen. And now you've gotten a fuller understanding of that. And you're living in a kingdom that's about to go down. Right? You're living in that kingdom that's about to go down. And in fact, he'd kind of been put on the shelf. Belshazzar wasn't using him because he was Nebuchadnezzar's guy. We're putting Daniel out to pasture. He's in his late 70s. We don't need him anymore. And, he's going to get pulled back in chapters 5 and 6, and he's going to be 80, 82, 83 years old. Think about it. You'd already heard the vision. The vision is given to you again. And Daniel literally sees it happen. Daniel sees, we think, 2 out of these 4 kingdoms. He sees Babylon, he sees Persia. And there's, some people who say he might have even been there when Greece came in, but he would have been super old by that point. But he was alarmed and distressed. But here's the thing that Daniel does. Daniel seeks clarification. He said, "My spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this." Now, I want you to catch that for just a second. Now, I don't know how this works, but in some way, this vision was more than just a dream. It was a dynamic vision Daniel was actually in. And Daniel actually went to someone in the vision and said, "Hey, can you tell me what's going on? Wow. I'm a little confused." Now, here's the deal. What part of the vision is he in? Let me tell you what part he's in. He's in the presence of God. God is sitting on his throne, and Daniel is in the myriad and myriad and myriads of people who are worshiping God. And he looks over at somebody and says, "Hey, you're here and you're worshiping God. You probably know what's going on. Like, let that sink in for just a second. I don't know how God does this, but he does, where Daniel is literally in this vision where he can talk to someone, and we believe it's an angel, and he asks an angel. Now, there's some people, and I don't want to go this far. I hate even saying it, but I think it's pretty cool. There's some tradition that says it's actually Gabriel that he's talking to. Now, that would be cool, would it not? Like, because Gabriel is the giver of good news. Who's the one that tells the world that Jesus is coming? It's Gabriel. So, but that's not in there. So that just, do that with what you will. But he goes and he says, hey, can you tell me what's going on here? And one of the things that I love about Daniel is he always sought God's guidance. And he's still doing it. And every bit, remember we go back to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2, and he's like, you tell me the dream and you tell me the interpretation. And Daniel says, I can't. God can, I can't. And if I tell you what it is, it's only because God tells me. It's not me. And the problem is, what happens for the rest of the book of Daniel? Oh, Daniel has special powers. Daniel has a special connection to the gods. And he's like, no, God told me. And so here's the deal. Daniel didn't really understand what was happening. And so instead of just saying, okay, I don't know what's going on, what does he do? He asks. And I know this is going to seem like an oversimplification, but maybe we need to be like Daniel a little more often. That we come and we read God's word, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, right? Sometimes it's like, I don't get this. I don't understand how this works, and I don't know what to do. Here's what you do. You go and ask God for clarification. And here's another little secret you might not know. God has implanted the Holy Spirit inside of you. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ, you have the truth, and the Holy Spirit's job is to lead you into the truth and guide you into the truth and remind you of the truth. Here's our problem. We don't ask. We don't ask. Daniel recognized, I don't understand what's going on, so I'm going to go to the source. And that's what he did. He asked. So he says, hey, I'm struggling with this, and tell me what's going on. Now, here's what the guy says. Verse 17, these great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will arise from the earth. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. That wasn't Daniel's question. Because Daniel was going to say, well, I really wanted to know about the terrible beast. I want to talk about him again. But here's God doing what God always does. God pushing us past some of the things that we think that we need to know to what he wants us to know. And here's what he says. Yeah, these beasts are coming and they're kingdoms and they're going to arise from the earth. But, that's the greatest word in the Bible. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. Because here's the deal. Not once in the visions was there anything said about God's people. You just have these nations coming in turmoil and damage and destruction and devouring. And it's like, I'm sure Daniel's thinking, well, what about us? What about us, God? Here's what he says. But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. Here's what he says. Beasts will seize, saints will receive. He says beasts are going to do what beasts do. They come in and they try to seize control and they try to exert control and influence and power, and they're going to seize it and it's going to be taken from them. Saints, however, without any power, without any war, without any seizing, you're going to receive. You're going to be given. And when it's given to you, it will never be taken away. Now, again, he's still stuck on the beast, so he comes back again. Help me understand this. Talk to me about this. And so he does. Now, one of the things, and I don't want to get too deep into this because we're going to talk about this in Daniel chapter 8. We're going to kind of get into this a little further. Basically, what's happening here is that God is trying to help Daniel understand, and soon John, who writes the Gospel of John, the Epistles of John and Revelation, that there has always been and there will always be an adversary to God, the Antichrist. And so this little horn that he's talking about, that's kind of the antagonist of this beast, Yes, there's always going to be kingdoms on the earth that devour and they destroy and they hurt the people of God. And here's the thing, all of those kingdoms, what he's trying to help us understand, all of those kingdoms are backed by the Antichrist. And now remember, we talked about this in 1 John. There is a literal Antichrist coming, but John says that there are many Antichrists who have already come into the world. Anyone who denies Jesus is the Antichrist. And so here's what he's saying. There's going to be kingdoms. Rome's going to be one of them. And there's going to be a ton of kingdoms after that that are backed by the Antichrist. But there will come a day in the future when that little horn's going to pop up, who is the literal Antichrist. And so basically he is what we hear here. He's the Antichrist. He's the beast. He's the man of sin or man of lawlessness. In Timothy, he is the great beast coming out of the ocean in Revelation. It's all the same dude. All the same imagery, but it's the person who stands against God forever. He makes war against God and his people. He tries. Now, this is the crazy thing. It says in verse 25, he will speak out against the Most High, wear down the saints of the Highest One. He will intend to make alterations in times and in law. Now, yours might say seasons. Like legit what this guy is going to do is he's going to get up and basically claim that he has power to change the seasons. Like, oh, it's winter, now it's spring. That he basically, and this is what we see in Revelation, it's kind of fleshed out a little bit more, that the great beast comes and he mimics the power of Jesus. He has healing power. He has, miracle power. He has all these. In fact, he, raises one of the beasts from the dead who had a mortal wound. He touches him and raises him from the dead, right? And so the great beast has this power. But he's only given this for a time and a half. And so basically it's 3.5 years that this guy has this kind of power and influence. Now we know, we hear about this all the time. It's the tribulation period. It's, the period before Jesus comes back. We can get into all that. But here's the thing that I want you to hold on to. Verse 26, the court will sit for judgment. His dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. So, listen, yes, kingdoms are going to come. They're going to rise. They're going to fall. Things are going to be bad. There's going to be a guy there's going to be kingdoms who stand against God and God's people. They're going to make it difficult for us. And there is a guy coming who is going to take over the entire world as the Antichrist. Yes, but in every situation, they're gone. In every situation. And here's what he ends with. God's people and kingdom win. Verse 27. Sovereignty, dominion, and greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints, of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. And there it is. I want you to think about that, being Daniel and having this vision and having experienced everything you've experienced with Nebuchadnezzar and knowing the things that are about to come. What greater hope could you hear than, hey, it's going to be okay. I'm going to take care of my people. I'm going to give all the kingdoms of the world to you because I'm going to give you the great king and the great kingdom, and it'll never be taken away. Now, before we close, he ends with this and says that I kept this matter to myself. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you keep that to yourself? That's a pretty bitter pill to swallow, to take to these people who don't believe in God. And you're talking about destruction and all this kind of stuff. Now, real quick, and we don't have a lot of time. I want to run through this really, really quick. Because from now to the end of the book, it's going to be a lot of prophecy. We're going to be talking about future events. We're going to be talking about current events to Daniel. We're going to be talking about things that are going to happen 100 years after. We're going to be talking about all sorts of different stuff. And I want to lay some groundwork as we move forward, okay? What does this vision tell us about the end times? Well, one of the things it tells us is that we never run past what it was telling Daniel and his people. One of the struggles that we have when we read, Daniel or Ezekiel or Revelation is we don't really care what it was saying to the people at the time. We just want to know, is America there? Is America there? Are we going to stand like what? Listen, we get in a lot of trouble theologically and biblically when we run past the fact that this was written to Daniel in a certain time, in a certain place, for a certain reason. And so, yes, there are future things to come, but we need to really deal with what's going on here, okay? And so here's one of the things that we need to deal with. God has a plan and is working that plan. That's what he's telling Daniel. I have a plan. I'm working that plan, and my plan is for your good and for my glory. Okay? These kingdoms are not ultimately in control. And there is a good king and a great kingdom that's coming. Now, I know that's not sexy, and so that's going to lead into my next point. You will drive yourself crazy trying to fit this into a timeline. And that's what we want. God, give me a wall chart that I can hang on my wall, and I can say, well, I'm right here, March of 2023, and I know that this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this, and then we're gone. Listen, it's not about timeline. And I do want to say this. There is nothing wrong with having firm beliefs about the end times. I encourage that. Nothing wrong about that. Nothing wrong with that. But, remember that word but? You must remember that no one knows exactly, and that's okay. God isn't interested in giving us a timeline. Because if he was, he would have given it to us. He's not interested in that. And so here's the thing, guys. Like, some of this, we just need to rest and say, this is true. This is God's plan. He's working out his plan, and I trust that. I don't understand how all this stuff's going to happen. But again, I want to reiterate, there's nothing wrong with having firm beliefs about the end time. That's we should. Okay? And whenever we come to Daniel, whenever we come to Ezekiel, whenever we come to Revelation, whenever we come to prophecy, the question that we should really be concerned with is not, like the bugs with wings, are those Apache helicopters? What we should be concerned with is, what is God trying to communicate to me? Let's not forget the great hope of this message. And here's the great hope of this message in case you've missed it. God wins. Amen. And if God wins, we win. Now, things will get bad. Persecution will happen. Things are going to get tough. But God wins. So again, I just want you to think about that. I want you to, ponder that as we go through these prophecy things. And listen, you may have very clear and passionate understandings. Fantastic. Share those. I'd love to hear them. But let's never forget what God's doing here. God is speaking to a man who has lived in slavery his entire life, who has watched this horrible, immoral kingdom destroy people's lives. And he's been asking the question, how long, O Lord? Why, O God? When, O God? And God answers the question. This is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it, and this is what you're going to see. Any questions or comments before we go? Linda?
I'm just asking you, this all tied together for me like the book of Esther.
Sure.
The whole book, God wasn't mentioned once, and yet this all, what you just went through tonight, all went through the book of Esther.
Sure.
And I just read the whole book sometime a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And same thing.
That God's in control whether we see it or know it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because she was kind of like the Daniel.
Sure.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Back to the word.
Okay, let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for this time that we've had together. Thank you for your word. And I pray tonight that we would take a lot of comfort and hope that you win. That you don't just win in the end, that you win all the time. And if there's something that we're dealing with right now, help us to see your hand at work for our good and for your glory, and that you're going to win. And because of that, we win. And so, Father, we trust you, we thank you, and we love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.